Okay, so without further ado, Mark Fatla, thank you very much for being here. Look forward to your program.
Thank you. All right. I'm Mark, and the talk is Pittsburgh's historic stadiums and arenas. And it's the history of the venues that have hosted pro football, hockey, and basketball in Pittsburgh. It's based on my book, oddly enough, titled Pittsburgh's Historic Stadiums and Arenas. And I am going to apologize in advance because I've never done a session for visual impaired or a session online. So this is all new to me. So I'm almost certain to screw this up at some point. So I'm not trying to be rude or insensitive, but if I say, oh, and as you'll see at the bottom left of the screen, understand I'm just an idiot. So I'd rather you feel pity for me than anger. So I apologize in advance if I screw that up because I'm almost certain to do so. All right. And you know, the book is over 250 historic photographs. So I use about 50 of them in this slideshow. I'll do my best to articulate what's on the screen. Forgive me. And if I'm not doing it, you have a question, feel free to pop up, or those of you in the room, wave frantically and ask your question. And for those of you at home sitting in your pajamas, just put it on the chat. All right. This is not about the baseball parks. That's my first book, which came out in 2023, Pittsburgh's Historic Ballparks. And it covers the history of the 9 ballparks that have hosted Major League Baseball. So both books are not about the great players or teams, but about the venues themselves, how they were conceived, constructed, adapted over time, and ultimately demolished. So a lot of other books about the great players, the championships. Mine focuses on the venues themselves and tells their story. We'll start with football, and there's a list of them, which we don't have to read because I'm going to go through them individually. We'll begin with Recreation Park, and this image is from 1892. It's a newspaper sketch of a 2-story grandstand with a curved front, with the individual boxes on the second level, divided into individual box seat sections. It began as Union Park in 1865 and was an early home to amateur and professional baseball. In 1884, a new grandstand is built, and it's renamed Recreation Park in 1885 and lasts like that until 1891. Then it's leased to a group called the Allegheny Athletic Association, often called the 3A's. And it's often called 3A's Park after 1892. The ballpark's significant for a couple of reasons. For one, and it's just this past Wednesday, April 15th, was the 150th anniversary of the first professional baseball game played in Pittsburgh. So April 15th of 1876, the Allegheny, a local professional team, the first professional team in Pittsburgh, played an amateur club called Xantha. And they won 7-3, but that was the first professional baseball game in Pittsburgh 150 years ago, just on Wednesday. Recreation Park is also important because in 1892, well, it was their early home of the team that became the Pirates. They were called the Pittsburgh Alleghenies from 1884 until 1890. And then they moved to Exposition Park and become the Pirates in 1891. But in 1892, the ballpark is still standing. It's leased to the Allegheny Athletic Association. They're an amateur group that has different sporting activities. They have a baseball team, a football team, track and field events, bicycling and whatnot. And they lease the ballpark to use for their various athletic activities. In October of 1892, the 3As, or Allegheny Athletic Association, played a football game against their hated rival, the Pittsburgh Athletic Club in the East End. And they played to a 0-0 tie. They set up a rematch for November 12th of 1892 at Recreation Park in front of that grandstand. And both teams were looking to get an edge. So they were looking to bring in a ringer to help them against their rival. And this guy, there's a photo on the screen of a strapping young guy. He was acclaimed as the best college football player of the day, played for Yale, and you couldn't make this name up, William Pudge Heffelfinger. Pudge comes into town, sets himself up in a hotel, and proceeds to have the Pittsburgh Athletic Club and the Allegheny Athletic Association bid for his services. The 3As win the bidding, pay him $500 in 1892 to play in a single game. And he turns out to be worth every penny because he causes a fumble, scoops it up, runs it in for the game's only score. And the 3As beat their hated rival by a score of 4-0, because a touchdown's only worth 4 points back then. They also make a profit on the ticket sales. So paying Pudge was a smart move. The trick is the treasurer of the 3As wrote in the club's ledger, paid to William Heffelfinger $500 to play in game. The Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton has that ledger page, and they consider that the first documented instance of a player being paid to play football. So Recreation Park on the north side of Pittsburgh at Pennsylvania and Allegheny Avenue is the birthplace of professional football, recognized by the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So it's not only the home of the earliest baseball efforts, but it's also the birthplace anywhere of professional football. Recreation Park was also an early home of the Western University of Pittsburgh, or Western University of Pennsylvania, or WUP. They later became the University of Pittsburgh, now called Pitt. Personally, I like WUP better than Pitt. I wish they kept it. Go WUP. No, we got Hail to Pitt. Okay. But there's a team photo of them on the field at Recreation Park in 1899. Now, Recreation Park is also, in 1902, the site of the first professional football league. In 1902, a league was started with 2 teams from Philadelphia and 1 from Pittsburgh, and they were professional football teams. At this time, it was the first time that anybody had organized a professional league, and it was called the National Football League. It's not the current NFL; it's completely separate. It's that first NFL only lasted 1 season, but the Pittsburgh team was known as the Pittsburgh Stars because they brought together the best players from the various local teams. Unfortunately, they had all their practices and their scrimmages in Greensburg, which ticked off the sports writers because they couldn't take a day to go down and sit there and watch practices and try to interview players. So they derisively called them the Greensburg Stars. The only time they could see the team was when they played their actual games at Recreation Park. Fortunately, the team's pretty good, and they win the championship of the first NFL in 1902. And then after that 1 season, the league folded. So you can win a bar bet if you like. Who was the first champion of the NFL? Well, it was the Pittsburgh Stars, but it's not that NFL. The actual National Football League that we know doesn't come around until 1920. Exposition Park was built in 1890 to house a baseball team in what was called the Players League. In baseball in the early 1890s, players were very frustrated with the owners because they didn't feel they were getting paid fairly. The reserve clause kept them from changing teams. and the players could impose, or the owners could impose fines and discipline without appeal. So the players got together, created their own union called the Brotherhood, and they got investors, started their own league. A lot of major league players jumped from their teams in the National or American Association, the two major leagues at the time, to play for the Players League teams. In Pittsburgh, the investors built a brand new ballpark in 1890 called Exposition Park, and it was home to the Players League team. Unfortunately, the Players League experiment turns out to be a disaster for everybody, because basically baseball fans say, we're not buying tickets to either of your games, because the major leagues are still running their games and the Players League's running their games. So Pittsburgh had two teams that year. And both the owners and the players lose money like it's going out of style. So after one season, the Players League folds. The Pittsburgh Alleghenies, who've been playing at Recreation Park, they moved down into the brand new Exposition Park in 1891, and that's when they become the Pirates. So the name Pirates dates to 1891, but the franchise actually goes back to 1882. But it's also the home of professional football. And in the image on the screen, there's a team shot of the Duquesne Country and Athletic Club, an early professional team. And they're posed in front of the grandstand at Exposition Park. Grandstand had columns with trident bracing that held up the roof. Two big stair towers with pyramid roofs on top of them that were at the back of the grandstand, were a very prominent feature. And then the earliest luxury boxes, kind of rooftop seats on the edge of the roof of the grandstand, that were the best seats in the house. But because it's not only the home of baseball, it's also the home of these early professional teams. But Pittsburgh is the home, as we've already seen, the first professional football player. It's also the home of the first fully professional team. It's the home of the first professional team owner. And as we saw in 1902, the first professional football league. So Pittsburgh in the 1890s into the early 1900s is the center of professional football in the country. And Exposition Park also saw certain innovations. There's a real photo postcard image of game action at a Western University of Pennsylvania game, whoop, soon to be Pitt. And what's notable about this is the players have patches on their backs with numbers. This is the first time that anybody had put numbers on the backs of players. And it happened on the north side at Exposition Park on a University of Pennsylvania, Western University of Pennsylvania game. So Pitt was innovative here in Pittsburgh by putting numbers on their players. The image on the screen is an aerial of the north side in 1916, and it shows Exposition Park and various other landmarks, many of which still exist. But one of those, number 8 on this map, is the tavern owned by Dan Rooney, Art Rooney's dad. Now, Art Rooney later becomes the founder of the Pittsburgh Steelers, but he grew up on the north side near the stadium, near Exposition Park, just a block away. And he played ball, both football and baseball, amateur and semi-pro, on the field at Exposition Park, and he played there as a kid. So it was central to his life and his early involvement in sports. And a couple of years ago, I came upon this in a card shop up in Butler. It's a flannel baseball uniform from the 1930s. And it says Northside across the chest. And on the sleeve, it has B of T. So I did a little research, found out it was the Northside Board of Trade. They were one of the top semi-pro teams locally. And I found out that their star player, leadoff hitter, and center fielder was Art Rooney. Now, Art was a neighbor of mine. I actually met him on several occasions and sent this pic of the uniform that I found, sent it to a member of the family. They sent me back this photograph of Art and his brothers wearing that uniform. So we know that Art was a star player for that. Now, they didn't have numbers or names on the back of amateur jerseys at the time. So the way it worked was after a game, they threw all the jerseys in a pile, somebody do the laundry, and the next game, everybody just grab one. So you can't say that, this was Art Rooney's jersey, but he undoubtedly wore it because everybody just grabbed one out of the pile. So that's my connection to Art Rooney. Now, here's a photograph of Art in his office at Three Rivers Stadium. Standing next to him is his son, Dan Rooney, the ambassador, who's also a neighbor and who I knew, and I knew his wife, Pat, very well. But behind him on the wall, along with various other mementos, a big frame photograph of the Exposition Park. And it was there always as a reminder to Art that that's where he got his start in sports. That's where he first played ball as a kid, where he played as a young man in both football and baseball. And he kept that image of Exposition Park with him. All right, let's turn to Homestead, Steelworks Park in Homestead. This is a newspaper illustration of the ballpark. And it was built right next to the steelworks, so right within easy proximity of the steel plant. But it was home in 1900 to 1902 to the Homestead Library and Athletic Club. So I don't know, some libraries need to start athletic clubs, I think. But Homestead had the library and athletic club, and they were the finest professional team in the country for 3 years running, almost unbeatable from 1900 to 1902. And they played on that field at Steelworks Park in Homestead. Long gone, of course, but they would dress at the library in Homestead and then walk down the hill to play the games at the ball field. And then after the game, they had to hike back up the hill to the library where they could clean up and change back into their regular clothes. Let's talk about Forest Field. Forest Field, built in 1909, lasted until 1970. This image is from 1915, but it was home to the Pittsburgh Pirates. After they leave Exposition Park, they move into Forest Field in 1909. It's also home for many years to the Homestead Grays team of the Negro National League. But Forest Field was also very active in football. They hosted several college teams. Pitt football played there from 1909 to 24. Carnegie Tech was prominent in the 1920s and used Forest Field as their home field. And Duquesne was a national powerhouse in the 1930s, and they played there from 1933 to 1950. The image on the screen shows how a football field was squeezed into Forest Field. And because Forest Field was a very spacious ballpark, Barney Dreyfuss, who built it, didn't like home runs. So he had a very large outfield. And the side benefit was you could actually fit a football field onto it. It didn't work really well, but it was used for football and used for Steeler football from their founding in 33 until 1963. Here's the Pittsburgh Steelers in 1933. They're actually not the Steelers yet. They first were founded as the Pittsburgh Pirates. They had no relationship to the baseball team, but Art Rooney founded the team, and he wanted something that was going to, stick with sports fans in their minds. So he stole the name Pirates. And so they're founded in 1933 as the Pittsburgh Pirates. And this is a team photo of them in 1933. And at the far left, in a suit, is Art Rooney. He's no longer a player. He's an owner, the manager, a sports entrepreneur. And the team is renamed the Steelers in 1940. Art held a contest with the newspaper, and about a dozen people suggested Steelers. So that's what he wound up with. But that doesn't happen until 1940. Now, the Steelers, of course, needed a place to practice because they were using Forest Field for their home games. They couldn't practice there because the Pirates had games there. So they needed a practice field. Greenleaf Field was a Negro League stadium built in the Hill District and was built in 1932, demolished in 1938. In the 1930s, Art cut a deal with the owner, Gus Greenleaf, to hold Steeler practices and scrimmages there. And so, mind you, Pittsburgh is a very segregated place at the time, but Art always had good relationships in the minority community and had a good working relationship with the Negro League teams and with Greenleaf. So he rents the field for his practices, and the early football team, the Pirates, soon to be the Steelers, practiced at Greenleaf Field in the Hill District in the 30s. And this newspaper sketch shows how the ballpark, Greenleaf Field, was used for football, how it was laid out. Here's an aerial of Forest Field in the 1940s, and this aerial shows how the football field was squeezed onto the baseball diamond. And the thing about Forest Field was it didn't work really well for football because, well, all the seats are most of the seats are beyond the end zone. The grandstand is at one end, and that's where the vast majority of people, which is when you have a diamond, that's fine because everybody's along the foul lines and they can see home plate and the pitcher's mound and most of the action of a baseball game. But for a football stadium, most of the action is well down the field, and all these people are still sitting all the way down behind the end zone. And the bleachers down the left field line look like they're about a half a mile from the field. So baseball fields just don't work really well for football. During World War II, the Steelers and the Philadelphia Eagles, there was a problem in the league. There weren't enough able-bodied men to staff all the football teams. Of course, they'd gone into the military or into war industry jobs. So in 1943, the Steelers and the Philadelphia Eagles combined their rosters to create the Steagles. And they played half their games in Pittsburgh and half in Philly. And they weren't bad. This is a little montage of the Steagles team. By the way, all these guys had to be ineligible for military service because of some physical deformity or problem. For example, their leading receiver that year was blind in one eye. Now, I'm not sure how you catch a football when you have no depth perception, but their leading receiver was blind in one eye. After one season, enough Eagles come back from the war that they can field their own team. So the Art cuts a deal with the Chicago Cardinals and combines rosters with the Cardinals. And the 1944 team is known as the Card Pits. They're terrible. They played 10 games. They lose them all. They're not even close in any of them. Even Art said they were the worst team in the history of the NFL. They got the nickname the Carpets because everybody walked all over them. So we get through World War II. This is an image of a game at Forest Field, and I'll describe it to you. It basically shows sunlight streaming through the steel framework of Forest Field, highlighting the players in a game action on the field. But it's just an image that's incredible because of the sunlight rays coming through the structure, the steel framework of the stadium. But the Steelers made Ford Field their home for many years. University of Pittsburgh college football, they got frustrated with how the Ford Field works. So they built their own stadium in 1925. And this is an aerial Pitt Stadium seen in 1945. It's the home of Pitt football from 1925 to 1999. And it's also home to the Steelers for at least part of their schedule from 1958 to 69. So Pitt Stadium, of course, purpose-built for football. All the seats have unobstructed views of the football field. It's not like Forbes. And everybody's, reasonably close. I think probably the top of the stadium, the farthest seats from the field are probably closer than the bleachers were at Ford Field. In the 60s at Pitt Stadium, the Steelers had cheerleaders. We were the first NFL team to have cheerleaders, and here are the Steelerettes, who operated from 1961 to 69. And they were all posed in their rather demure uniforms, sweaters and vests and skirts that barely show their knees. And they were organized, and we're the first NFL team to have cheerleaders. And the Steelerettes were part of the game experience throughout the 60s. And then in 1969, with Three Rivers Stadium about to open the next season, the Steelerettes went to Art and said, we'd like to update our look. It's 1969, right? It's the summer of love. They wanted something a little more contemporary, maybe a little sexier. Art said, no way. And rather than argue with the women, he simply eliminated the cheerleaders. And to this day, we're the only NFL team without cheerleaders. So we were the first to get them, and now we're the last to not have them. Yeah, but he didn't want to show any more than their knees. All right. After World War II, Ford Field is showing its age. There's a lot of ideas being kicked around about building a new stadium that would house baseball and football in Pittsburgh. And there are lots of different ideas and concepts being floated. The image here is an artist's sketch of a concept for a stadium built on a platform out over the Monongahela River. I'm not sure how the heck this would have worked. I mean, the engineering would be unbelievable. Everything has to be on columns set into the river. And it's got to be high enough for barges and other ships to pass underneath it. And it's got to carry the weight of a stadium, 50,000 people, all their cars, and in this drawing, 2 office towers or apartment buildings that look to be about 12 stories high. Like, how the heck were you going to put all that and suspend it over the river? But I don't think this idea got very far. But it's illustrative of the way people were kind of kicking around ideas for replacing Ford Field after World War II. Here's Three Rivers Stadium in an aerial in its football configuration. Now, the thing about Three Rivers was they finally solved this problem of putting a football field in a baseball field. The field level seats were on tracks. And so they could rotate so that when it was in baseball configuration, the seats were along the foul lines. And then when they set the field for football, they would rotate the lowest level of seats so that they were now parallel to the sidelines of the football field. And so they were able to adapt to that different geometry of baseball and football by making huge sections of the seating bowl movable. So, and it worked that way until the stadium is demolished in 2001. So there's an aerial that shows it in its football configuration. Heinz Field opens in 2001. And in 2022, it's renamed, what is it now? Are You Sure Stadium? Are You Sure? Are you sure? This image shows Heinz Field being built right next to Three River Stadium. And you can see how close they were. There was only about 80 feet that separated the structure of Heinz Field from the existing stadium. So that when Three Rivers was demolished, they had to be very careful because there was another stadium just right across the street. All right, let's talk hockey. Pittsburgh has a pretty dramatic hockey history, far earlier than the Penguins. Schenley Casino was built in Schenley at the edge of Schenley Park in 1895, roughly where the Fine Arts Building is today, out behind the Carnegie Main Library. And built in 1895, and it was gorgeous. The image shown here shows it with 18-foot high Palladian windows. It had over 1,500 electric lights, which in 1895 is a big deal. And it's the home of the first artificial indoor ice rink in North America. Up in Canada, they're playing hockey on frozen ponds and lakes. Nobody figured out how to create artificial ice. But in Pittsburgh, they figured this out, and they build this building, and they build it with an indoor artificial ice rink. And this image shows the earliest hockey image in Pittsburgh. This is the interior of the Schenley Casino in 1895. And again, you can see how gorgeous this building was. Carved woodwork, those big Palladian windows with stained glass in the arches at the top. I mean, it was an incredible structure. If it were still here today, it would be one of the great gems of Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, Schenley Casino lasts about 18 months. That the system they used to create the ice, they had pipes that circulated ammonia, then they poured concrete over top of the pipes. And so the ammonia would be circulated through those pipes. It would cool down the concrete. They would float water on top of it, which would freeze. Unfortunately, the ammonia sprung a leak, starts a fire. The fire gets to the storage tank that houses most of the ammonia. And when it gets hot enough, the tank explodes and just rips this building apart, causes a fire that destroys the entire thing in a matter of hours. And so we lose Schenley Casino after just 18 months. But they've already demonstrated that ice skating and hockey are popular. Schenley Casino kind of proved that. So City Fathers being in the look around for a new location. A few blocks away on Craig Street in Oakland is a trolley barn. And the thing about trolley barns, big open spaces with high roofs, because you got to get all these trolleys in and then be able to do maintenance and whatnot on them. And so the trolley barn is purchased and converted to a multi-use venue that includes an indoor hockey rink, just like Schenley Casino. But it also includes a stage, and they can host concerts and operettas. They host basketball and boxing events and the like. It's a multi-use venue. And it opens in 1899, lasts until 1956, and it's called Duquesne Garden. This is an interior from 1901 of a hockey game with teams at center ice. And it shows the big trusses that held up the roof of the garden and the seating around the edges. And this is a game between the Pittsburgh Athletic Club and Queen's University college team from Canada in 1901. And this exhibition game is so incredibly popular. The place is packed. Every ticket is sold. And the operators of the garden realized there's money to be made in hockey. So they start organizing hockey teams, both amateur and, well, quasi-professionally. They're not kind of openly professional, but they start charging tickets for the games. And if you're charging tickets, and by the way, in Canada, you can't really charge money to watch hockey. Remember, you're on a frozen pond or a lake. Any fans of the game have got to sit in the snow around the frozen pond or lake, and they're freezing their butts off. But in Pittsburgh, they figured out how to put hockey inside. And since the ice is cooled from below, people can actually sit and watch the game in some level of comfort. So you can now charge money to watch hockey. Well, you can't do that in Canada. And if you can charge money for people to watch it, you can start to pay players. So all these great hockey players from Canada start coming to Pittsburgh. And they're supposedly amateurs that they're given like no-show jobs and paid under the table and whatnot. But the earliest professional teams are organized at Duquesne Garden. And it's really the birthplace of professional hockey. It's such a hotbed in the early years of, at Pittsburgh. Nationally, we are the center of hockey for the U.S. And in 1920, the manager of Duquesne Garden, Roy Schooley, who's seen here in the center with his first Olympic team, he's asked to organize the U.S. Olympic team for the first Olympic hockey team. And they win silver at the Summer Olympics in Antwerp, Belgium. And yes, I said Summer Olympics because they don't have the Winter Olympics yet. The Olympics are all one event in the summertime. And so the first Olympic hockey team is organized at Duquesne Garden, plays several exhibition and fundraising games at the Garden, then goes over to Belgium and wins the silver medal. Duquesne Garden gets significant renovations in the early 20s, adding a mezzanine. This image shows the addition of the mezzanine and some canvas that kind of softened the look of the truss work in the roof. And at one end of the rink, you see a big stage that was there from the beginning. Like I said, this is a multi-use venue. So when they weren't using it for hockey, they would break up the ice, bring in chairs, and you could have band concerts, on the stage with chairs set up on what was the rink when it had ice in it. But when it doesn't have ice in it, it can be used for everything from boxing matches to trade shows, like some of the early radio industry shows when radio first comes up are held at Duquesne Garden. Political events are held there. So it's not just an ice rink, it's used for a wide variety of activities. This image shows the Pittsburgh Hornets in 1945. They were a minor league hockey team that played in Pittsburgh from 1936 to 56 at Duquesne Garden. Pittsburgh's early hockey history is like a kaleidoscope. Teams and leagues change every year, and they come and go. And there's more detail about it in my book, more than I can possibly give you in a talk. But the Hornets are the longest lasting professional team, the minor league team, from 36 to 56 when Duquesne Garden closes. Duquesne Garden was also the home of different innovations nationally. Before Duquesne Garden, there was around the rink, there was netting that kept pucks and players and sticks from flying off the ice into the crowd. PPG, which Pittsburgh Plate Glass, they developed a new shatter-resistant glass called Herculite, and they went to the Hornets and said, "We'd like to try this." And so they replaced the netting with big panes of this Herculite glass. And today, if you watch a hockey game, you'll see there's glass all around the rink. Well, that started in Pittsburgh with PPG in their Herculite glass. We're also one of the first rinks to have a Zamboni. Zamboni, which is used to shave the ice and refinish it, was invented by a guy named Zamboni. He came back from World War II, and there were a lot of surplus Army Jeeps. So he invented this contraption that he attached to a surplus Army Jeep to use to refinish ice. And the operator of Duquesne Gardens saw it and said, I want one. In fact, I want two. And so he had one for Duquesne Garden. And then the operator of the garden also created, John Harris created the Ice Capades, the traveling ice show. And he sent one of the Zambonis on the road with the ice show to smooth the ice in other rinks wherever the Ice Capades would play. So Duquesne Garden was a place where innovation happened, kind of leading the country in these things. Duquesne Gardens renamed the Gardens, or Duquesne Gardens with an S, in 1940 after Motor City Garden closed out in East Liberty. And it then closed and demolished in 1956. Let's talk about the exposition buildings down at the Point. It was also an early home of hockey during 1915 to 17. Built in 1903, the exposition buildings were located at the Point. And there were really three individual buildings. The section closest to you in the image on the screen is the music hall. And all the great bands and orchestras played there, like John Philip Sousa and the like. The second building, a little bit to the right, was the main hall, and it was used for expositions, an annual display, kind of like a big home and garden show kind of thing with, showing off Pittsburgh industry and innovation. And those were very popular right up until about World War I. And then the last building at the farthest right in this image is the machinery hall, which kind of was dedicated to Pittsburgh industry. When attendance at the expositions begins to fall, the operators of the exposition buildings are casting around for a different idea to use the main hall. And with Duquesne Garden and their ice rink being so popular, they decide to add an ice rink, and they call it the Winter Garden. And it opens in 1915, and it lasts until 1917, pretty much when the war and the influenza epidemic put an end to most things like hockey. For one thing, suddenly ammonia is necessary for the war effort, so you can't use it to cool your ice rink. And then when the Spanish flu epidemic happens, ain't nobody going to watch hockey. So hockey at the Winter Garden pretty much ends in 1917. But the exposition buildings were important for one thing. The Winter Garden was the home to the first women's hockey league. There were three teams: the Polar Maids, the Arctic Maids, and the Winter Garden Girls. And they played professional women's hockey at the Winter Garden in the season of 1916 to 17. And here's a newspaper photograph of one of the girls' teams at the garden, at the Winter Garden. The Winter Garden is also the home of the final game of Hobey Baker. Hobey Baker was a great amateur college hockey and football player, and considered one of the greatest athletes at the time. And he organized a traveling team from Philadelphia. They came to Pittsburgh to play the best local hockey teams, hockey players in a kind of all-star game at the Winter Garden. And they played that game in 1917. Immediately after that, Hobey Baker leaves and goes off to Europe. He joins the Army and is part of the Air Corps. He becomes a pilot, and he's a successful fighter pilot during the war, becomes a bit of a war hero. And he is set to come back to the US, having completed his term of service. But the day he's supposed to leave from Europe, they ask him to take up a plane which had been repaired and do a test flight. He doesn't have to, but he goes up and he does a test flight, and the plane crashes and he's killed, literally the day he's supposed to come back to the US. As a result, Hobey Baker is, this tragic figure, but to this day, the Hobey Baker Award is given every year to the top amateur hockey player in the country. But Hobey Baker's final game was played at the Winter Garden at the Exposition Buildings. Just like through Stadium, there was a lot of talk after the war about coming up with a new idea for an arena. After Duquesne Gardens closed, there was no hockey venue in Pittsburgh. So people are thinking about that, but also a home for the Civic Light Opera and other activities. And so this planning model from 1956 shows the arena, but the arena was part of a much larger concept. There were 3 apartment towers on the one side. There was a new concert venue for the symphony. There was an opera stage. There was a museum planned for it. All these different ideas, none of them really ever came together except one of the apartment towers and the Civic Arena itself. Here's a sketch of kind of a rendering of a schematic of the Civic Arena from 1960 that shows kind of the details of the structure in a cutaway. So the Civic Arena, built during 1960, stainless steel skin. If you were inside it, you remember it was smooth skinned on the inside, but during construction, of course, this image shows it before the skin is applied, and all this scaffolding had to be applied to the inside to be able to reach the ceiling and apply the skin to the interior. And this image shows the Civic Arena fully open. It has 6 panels that kind of rotated and all recessed under one section of the roof. And so when it was fully open, it was an engineering marvel. And this image shows exactly why that was so astounding for the time. There's nothing holding up this roof. There's nothing under it. There are no internal supports. It was the largest unsupported dome in the world when it was opened in 1961. Before that, the largest dome was St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And we hold the distinction of the largest unsupported roof until the Houston Astrodome is opened in 65. So, but aside from being the largest unsupported dome, it's also retractable, so it can open. It is unbelievable at the time that it's built. I mean, people forget how truly significant the arena was. The Hornets are revived in 1961 with the Civic Arena as their home. They've been in mothballs since the Duquesne Gardens closed in 56. And the Hornets operated until 1967 when the city is awarded a franchise in the National Hockey League. The Hornets were minor league. So the Penguins were organized in 1967 and joined the big time, the NHL. And the Hornets win their championship in their final season in 1967 and then hand it over to the Penguins. Seating at the Civic Arena was expanded several times, particularly during the 1970s. This image with the roof open shows the added mezzanines at either end of the rink that were expanded. One of the nice things about having a roof that opens on a building is that it's easy to do construction on the inside. You just get a big crane and you bring in the beams or the structural elements and the seats and everything. It's easy to bring everything inside. The downside is you have to operate within that dome. You can't expand outside of the envelope of the dome. So everything has to be carefully fit within the volume of that dome. Excuse me. 1999 the Civic Arena gets a bit of a makeover, including a new plaza, a new entrance marquee, and it's renamed the Mellon Arena in 99. Here it is during demolition in 2012. And again, we forgot at the time of demolition how truly significant this building was. But it's demolished in 2012. It's replaced by Consol Energy Center, now PPG Paints Arena. And obviously still home to the Penguins. Heinz Field gets into the hockey act a little bit. They host the Winter Classic on the field at Heinz Field in 2011. And they've since hosted a couple of other outdoor hockey games. So Heinz Field gets at least credit as a site for professional hockey. All right, let's talk basketball real quick. And there's a whole bunch of sites. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to hit some of the highlights on basketball. Basketball also has a rather convoluted and kaleidoscopic history in Pittsburgh. The earliest basketball teams in the 1890s played at Old City Hall in downtown. It's an image of the building, a big Victorian pile of bricks. But it was one of the few buildings in Pittsburgh that had a big enough indoor space to house a basketball court and seating. And so some of the earliest basketball teams in Pittsburgh are actually held in City Hall. The Southside Market House, seen here in 1915, was also an early home to basketball from the 1890s. It was gutted by fire in 1915, but rebuilt, and it is still in operation. It is a city rec center on the south side. So it's one of the few market houses that still survives. But it was an early home to professional basketball. All right. Washington Fieldhouse, which was in the Hill District, and was demolished for the Civic Arena in the 1950s. This is an early home to professional Negro basketball teams, often called Black Fives, because you had 5 players on the court at any time, and they were called Black Fives. They didn't have leagues like Negro leagues had in baseball, so they played an independent schedule, playing whoever they could schedule games with that they thought would sell tickets. And they played a number of their games at Washington Fieldhouse in the Hill. Like I said, it's now since been demolished for the Civic Arena. They also played a lot of games at the Union Labor Temple in the Hill, particularly in the 1920s. The Union Labor Temple was the home of the Lowendy Club. It was a Black athletic club, and they were acknowledged nationally as the greatest professional Black basketball team in the country for 4 years running. They were tremendous, and they were regularly billed as, quote, colored basketball's world champions. Duquesne University's gym, and I went to Duquesne. I was unaware at the time that the gym had actually hosted professional basketball. It was home to teams in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. In 1926, they're home to a team in a professional league, and the team's called the Second Story Mories. There was a fella who owned a menswear business downtown. His name was Maury, and his business was on the second floor. And he his premise was that he paid lower rent for a second story space than he would for street level. So he passed the savings on to his customers. And his slogan was, "Come upstairs, I'll make it worth your while." And he called his store Second Story Maury's. And to help advertise the store, he bankrolled a local semi-pro team and called them the Second Story Maury's. And they were a very prominent local basketball team. They were a big rival of the Loewendy Club. So the Loewendy Club is all black. The Second Story Maury's are mostly Jewish. And they had a big, big rivalry with the Loewendy Club. And anytime they played, you were guaranteed to pack the house. But the Second Story Maury's joined a professional league in 26 and win the league. Unfortunately, the league folds after the one season, and that's the end of the Second Story Maury's. But Duquesne's gym was their home in 26, 27. Also home to a team called the Pittsburgh Pirates in the late 30s and the Pittsburgh Raiders in 44, 45, both of which were just terrible. Yeah. Duquesne Gardens gets into the basketball act in 1946. There's a team called the Pittsburgh Ironmen in the Basketball Association of America. And they're terrible. They fold after that one season. 2 years later, the Basketball Association of America merges into the National Basketball Association, today's NBA. The NBA considers the BAA statistics as part of their history. So the Pittsburgh Ironmen of 1946-47 are generally acknowledged as the worst team in the history of the NBA. And they played at Duquesne Gardens. Happily, Duquesne Gardens was also the home of Duquesne's basketball team, which won the NIT and was nationally prominent, one of the best college teams of the time. They didn't have quite the same luck with pro basketball. The Civic Arena gets into the pro basketball business when they opened in 61. The Pittsburgh Renaissance, or Pittsburgh Wrens, are part of the American Basketball League. But unfortunately, the league folds halfway into its second season. And then along come the Pittsburgh Pipers in the American Basketball Association in 67. And they're really good. They've got a young star named Connie Hawkins, and they win the league title in 67, 68. And Pittsburgh goes basketball crazy. They're drawn pretty well to Civic Arena. They're building an audience base for pro basketball. And then the league moves the Pipers from Pittsburgh after they just won a championship, moves them to Minnesota, where they collapse. Hawkins is injured. The team doesn't play very well. They don't draw flies in Minneapolis. And after one lousy season in Minneapolis, they move back to Pittsburgh and they rebrand themselves as the Pittsburgh Condors. Pittsburgh basketball fans are like, you know what? You took our championship team with our star player who we loved, and you took him out of town, and then you're going to bring him back and expect us to buy tickets. So the Condors never really caught anybody's loyalty or attention. They struggled on for a couple of years at the arena. This image on the screen shows a Condors game where the team gave away every ticket in the arena for free. Now, the arena at the time seated 15,000 people. 8,000 people showed up. They gave away, and they couldn't give away any more than half of their tickets. So people wouldn't even go when you gave the tickets away free. But that was their biggest attendance, was when they just opened the doors and said, come on in. All right, so I'm going to finish with the draft, since the draft is coming up next week. This is so you can amaze your friends or maybe win a bar bet. A couple of basic draft facts. The first NFL draft was held in 1936, and the Pittsburgh Football Club drafts number 3 in the draft, William Shakespeare. I swear to God, you could not make this up. He is a halfback from Notre Dame, and so they draft William Shakespeare. The NFL is not the draw then that it is today. And William Shakespeare decides he's not going to play football. He's going into business, and he gets a job as a rubber salesman. Not rubbers, the prophylactis, rubber like tires and stuff like that. And he spends his career selling rubber. He'd rather sell rubber than play in what was then the NFL, which it wasn't the popular thing we know of today. So he never plays in the NFL. So the Steelers kind of wasted that first draft. Yeah. But the thing to remember is they're not yet the Steelers. So the first draft as the Pittsburgh Pirates was William Shakespeare. 1937, they drafted center from Duquesne. He only plays 2 seasons in the NFL. In 1938, they signed Byron Whizzer White. They drafted him. And Art Rooney actually ticked off all the other owners because White was not going to play football until Rooney offered him $15,000 for 1 season at a time when most players did not make half that. And White signs. How's he going to turn down that kind of contract? And he plays 1 season with Pittsburgh. Byron Whizzer White goes on to become a U.S. Supreme Court justice. So I think we're the only football team to have drafted a Supreme Court justice. 1939, they drafted forgettable Billy Patterson, but in 1940, it's their first draft as the Steelers. So if you want to win a bar bet, you ask, who was the first player drafted by the Steelers? And some people might actually say William Shakespeare because that name sticks in people's heads. But it is in fact Kay Eakin, because Shakespeare was drafted when they were not yet the Steelers. The first draft as the Pittsburgh Steelers was a halfback out of Arkansas, and he also never plays for the Steelers. So they were not having a lot of luck in the early days of the draft. So that's your draft tidbits. I hope you win a bar bet. The book is Pittsburgh's Historic Stadiums and Arenas, over 250 historic photos, and way more info than I can possibly give you in this little talk. It was published March of last year by Arcadia. And if you're at home in your pajamas, you can order it online or go to Barnes & Noble or one of the other bookstores and get it. It's $25. They make great Christmas presents, Father's Day gifts, birthday presents for your sports fans. You can also get it from me direct. The first book was Pittsburgh's Historic Ballparks, and that came out in 23, also published by Arcadia. And that's the history of the 9 baseball parks in Pittsburgh. It's also $25, and I throw in the autograph for free if you get it from me. You're welcome to contact me if you have questions, comments. If anybody had anything on the chat, I'm happy to try and answer or respond to anything you want. And if you'd like to reach me, there's my email, mark.fatla@gmail.com, or you can find me on Facebook. So you're welcome to give me a call. All right. Hope you like that. Hope I'm not too far over time. And any questions, comments, suggestions, complaints? Yes.
Any questions? Katie will come around with the microphone so those who are participating virtually can hear.
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't count online unless it's in the microphone, right? That is one long cord.
Oh, good, this is working. A question, the team in Homestead that you were talking about, were they playing baseball or football, or did they play both there?
They were known for their football clubs. Most of these teams also played other sports. So my guess is they might have played it, but anything that was written about or covered in the newspaper was their football team. So it would take deeper research to find out how much they played in the way of baseball. But most of these young athletes were playing in multiple teams, and many clubs would have multiple sports.
And I have a current question, and you can tell that I haven't been to many hockey games, but you were talking about the glass, the plexiglass. How high is that in the stadiums? I mean, in the arenas?
Yeah, I want to say nowadays it's about 3 feet tall.
Okay.
I'm guessing, I'm estimating.
Okay,
So it's high enough to keep, pucks, players, and sticks from flying
Really
off the
fly
ice
down.
into your lap. Yeah, we don't want that challenge.
that'd be a nice surprise.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Anything online in the chat?
Yeah, we have that here, right?
Okay.
Hold the microphone.
Oh, there's another one. Go ahead, Zach.
Yes, so when Art Rooney first, found the Steelers football team in 1933, they were called the Pirates.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Most people aren't aware of that. And like I said, he was just looking for something that would kind of ring with sports fans, so he stole the name Pirates, but it had no relationship to the baseball
Not know
team.
that.
Yeah. Early basketball teams also called the Pirates. And so, yeah, Pirates was often kind of appropriated. In the Negro Leagues, the Pittsburgh Keystones were the first Negro League baseball team in 1887. Ever after that, different Negro baseball teams are called the Keystones. They have no relationship to the earliest one, but that name kind of stuck in people's heads, so they would call their team the Keystones. So that happens in both the
So they were
Negro
called
Leagues.
the Keystones at one time too?
Yeah, no, not the Steelers weren't, but the same kind of appropriation of names happens in other sports and in other venues. Stealing the
Wow.
Pirates for their football teams, stealing the Keystones for baseball teams.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We also had the Shamrocks and the Hornets and lots of different named teams. Oh, all right. Anything else?
Christine, if you want to ask a question, but you're muted, so if you want to unmute, you can ask a question. We want to hear you. Christine, if you can hear us, if you want to ask your question, you can unmute.
Oh, technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The boss has something.
But Mark, this is super interesting. I was curious, did you get involved in writing? How did you get interested in writing this book? Was it because of proximity to the Roonies as neighbors?
I live on North Side on Beach Avenue. My house was built in 1870. One of the things I loved about my house was my wife let me live there with her. That was number one. Number two was it was walking distance to ball games at the River Stadium. And as I was going to games, I'm thinking, the guys who lived in my house from 1870 to 1909 were doing the same thing I'm doing today. They're blowing off work or whatever their wife wanted them to do around the house, and they were walking to a baseball game. And it's got me thinking, how was their experience similar to mine today, and how was it different? Well, there were a lot of some similarities, but they were going to watch baseball games in these tiny wooden ballparks. I was watching baseball in a giant concrete bowl. And that's what got me thinking about those earliest ballparks. So it's not on me, it's on the guys who lived in my house from 1870 until 1909. I was thinking about them and their experience.
Thank you. That's excellent. That's great.
I started doing the book partly because of the pandemic. I thought about the book for years, but when the pandemic happened, I was sitting there going, okay, I can't go to ball games, I can't go to bars, I can't go to restaurants, I can't even go to my Elks Lodge. What the heck am I doing with all this free time?
Worst time of our lives.
And I said, well, for me, I'm like, okay, I've got all this free time, I better do something with it. So I decided I would write the book. And that's when I started the research, happily, a lot of which could be done online. And then I knew people with the team, so I was able to get access to the Pirates archives and other stuff. But that's how it started, was really the pandemic gave me the time that I had to use productively.
Yeah, that was very interesting. You tied
Spanish influenza into your
book too.
Yeah.
That was effective sales. But okay, so have you won a lot of bar bets?
I can't reveal that. It's
I can't remember.
I can't. That's what dependent on how many drinks I won. I can't really recall. Anything else? All right. Well, hopefully I didn't screw up too bad. All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate you.